Curiosity is a big one. Being curious is a superpower in this space. In a world of infinite information, the ability to ask a really good question is priceless. So it's the ability to ask a really good question and then evaluate the response.
What has helped you evolve through all the changes that you've seen in your career?
Those iterative touches are how I stay really sharp.
I'm Dr. Amy Athey. As a licensed psychologist and performance expert, working with elite athletes, C-suite executives, and high performers operating in some of the most demanding environments, I've seen what it truly takes to perform when it matters most. From supporting members of the Naval Special Warfare community to advising leaders in high-stakes, high-pressure situations, one truth remains consistent. The tools that drive performance are the same. You prepare in a way that allows you to show up ready when the moment arrives. Each week, I'll share practical tools and insights to help you strengthen how you think, lead, and perform. Welcome to Still Evolving. Welcome back to Still Evolving. I'm Dr. Amy Athey. There's a shift happening underneath every knowledge-based industry right now, and it's quietly rewriting what it means to be a high performer. Information used to be the scarce resource. The people who had it, held it, and knew what to do with it were the ones who won. That world is gone. Information is now free, endless, and available to anyone with a device and a decent question, which raises the real question, which is what actually separates the people who thrive in this environment from the ones who drown in it. The answer I keep coming back to, and the one that runs through today's conversation, is that the essential skill has flipped. It is no longer about the ability to gather the information. It is about the ability to ask a really good question of it. In the world of infinite input, the quality of your question determines the quality of everything downstream, including the quality of the decision that follows. Great questioners cut through the noise. They surface what actually matters. They separate the interesting from the important, and they do it in real time while everyone around them is still scrolling through the possibilities. Most of my career has been spent inside high-performance environments, from elite sport to military, where the ability to ask sharp questions under pressure was treated as a trainable skill rather than a personality trait. The best coaches I worked with did not tell athletes what to do. They asked the question that unlocked what the athlete already knew. The best operators I supported did not walk into the mission with all the answers. They walked in with the right questions and discipline to keep asking them as the situation evolved. What I see now across executive leadership teams is that the same skill has become the differentiator in the AI era, and very few leaders have been taught how to build it. In my book, Moment Ready, which is out this month, I write about clarity as one of the 4 capacities that allow high performers to show up well when the moments that matter most arrive. Clarity is not about having all the information. It is about seeing the moment for what it actually is and knowing what is really being asked of you. Great questions are one of the primary tools that build clarity. They can cut through complexity. They surface the assumption you did not know you were making, and they turn a wall of information into a decision you can actually execute on. That skill is not built by consuming more content. It is built by practicing the discipline of the question itself over and over until it becomes automatic in the moments that count. There's one more piece I want to name before I bring my guest in, because it reframes something people are anxious about right now. The most powerful model for working with these new tools is not human versus machine. It is human with machine, and that combination consistently outperforms either one alone. The human brings judgment, taste, and the ability to know when something is off. The machine brings scale, speed, and access to everything ever written on a subject. Neither one is enough on its own. Together, they become something that neither could be alone. And the leaders who figure that out first are the ones who will define the next decades of their industries. Getting through that takes a little courage, though, because it means being willing to be a beginner with a new tool, to play with it in low-stakes ways, and to keep engaging even when the technology moves faster than your comfort with it. My guest today is Aaron Cruz, and Aaron is a partner at Holland & Knight's Innovation Practice Group, based in San Francisco, where he works at the strategic integration of AI, advanced legal technologies, and data-driven workflows. He brings more than 15 years of experience at the intersection of law, technology, and business transformation. And he is a trusted advisor to Fortune 50 legal departments. And he sits on the AI advisory boards of multiple law schools where he is helping shape the next generation of lawyers who will be trained. What makes him exactly the right voice for a conversation anchored in questions and the human-machine partnership is that he lives inside this tension every day. He is teaching lawyers how to ask better questions, showing skeptics what these tools can actually do, and building the case for a future where deep human expertise paired with the right technology produces work that neither could produce alone. Aaron, welcome to Still Evolving. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to jump in to your experience and journey as a leader around not just in the field of law, the legal industry, but also the application of emerging technologies. And we can't go a day or hour without talking about AI. So I'm curious, just in your journey, you've worked in the knowledge-based industry. So in this world now with infinite information out there, how is that shaping how you were leading? How have you leveraged questions and even discerning from all that's about?
For me, it's been a lot of trial and error, to be honest. But I think I've come up with kind of a couple of grounding formulas. I tell people a lot that in a world of infinite information, the ability to ask a really good question is priceless. And so the way I really think about sort of AI in general, right, is it's sort of an oracle of the combined information of largely the Western world, but, call it humanity. And historically, getting information was really hard. And it was super resource intensive, time, dollars. You spent a lot of time in university to learn how to do something. You paid a lot of money to be able to do that. We're sort of now in and entering this phase where information is free and at your fingertips. And it's almost like too much, right? There's like so much information, you can be easily overwhelmed by it. And in my experience, the way to counteract that is to ask a really good set of questions. And I try to be kind of ontological about the questions that I ask about something. So, and I try and teach or guide the people who work with me to kind of operate in the same way in this space. So in legal, a really good high-level question is how could AI be deployed to improve litigation, right? And the answers to that are many, but you kind of hone in on a couple, and you're like, well, that would be really valuable, and that would be really valuable, and that would be really valuable. And that winnowing function is kind of where the importance of people and their expertise comes in, right? So it's the ability to ask a really good question and then evaluate the response based on your expertise and your experience. And I really think that is irrespective of the domain that you're operating in. That's really the essential skill of knowledge workers for the foreseeable future in light of where this technology is and where it's likely going. And it's the importance of the people aspect of it, because AI is really good at giving you a whole bunch of potential pathways. It will, if you ask it to choose, it will choose, but it will often not actually choose the most impactful or the best route. It really requires that human sort of fusion with the technology to really get the most out of it. Those strategic choices, right? Because it doesn't understand like the emotional component. It doesn't understand like, will people say yes to this idea? You can build the greatest thing ever, but if nobody ever uses it, it's useless. There's a funny line in like Silicon Valley circles that like being early and being wrong are the exact same thing. People have had really good ideas, but they're so early with bringing that idea to market that it gets no traction. And then somebody comes along 5 years later and does the exact same thing, and it's $1 billion company, right? And it's because the timing was right. And that's kind of that human judgment piece. So that's how I try to shape like the folks around me in terms of thinking about how to leverage this sort of technology in their personal lives, and then on the other side of it in their professional lives.
I'm really curious if we could kind of dive in for a moment about asking those questions. So when you're working with younger attorneys, lawyers who kind of maybe fresh out and don't really have those reps under them, right? And you mentioned litigation, right? The number of hours they've spent just pales in comparison perhaps to you or other colleagues who've been in the industry for decades. How do you actually help the younger generation coming out, the younger professionals, develop this judgment when they haven't had those reps? Like what do you offer them?
Yeah, so this is one of my soapboxes at the moment, because it's particular. This is a particularly acute problem that people keep raising in the legal space. How do you develop young lawyers in a world where things have kind of been turned upside down by this technology? So the way we've taught lawyers to be lawyers in like the common law countries for the last 400 years or so is young lawyers like read, right? They read cases, they read statutes, they read regulations, and then they write, be that like briefs or like, transactional documents or whatever. And they're analyzing in the process of writing, and then they give that to somebody more senior who essentially gives them feedback. You got this right, you got this wrong, you missed this here. And it's this iterative process, right? But with the automating technology that is AI, you have people shifting from being writers to that editing function sort of out of the box. It like flips it on its head, inverts the pyramid, as I like to say. And it's kind of a conundrum for folks, but I actually think that the technology itself is really the answer. It's how a young professional of any stripe is going to get more reps and more feedback in a shorter period of time by interacting with these technologies. So like one of the things I teach in terms of like prompt and context engineering, whenever I'm writing a prompt for an AI, I will give it tons of context. So I'll give it the same amount of information that I would give to like an associate about a project that I would assign to an associate. I'm assigning to an AI instead. I give it that same level of information, detail. But one of my super prompts is I end that contextual prompt with something along the lines of the following. Before you begin drafting, what gaps do you see in my prompt and what questions do you have? And invariably, what I get back is a list of between 3 and 20 sort of questions, right? Particularly if it's an area of the law like I don't specialize in. It'll like, you didn't give me a prompt, or you didn't give me any information around an indemnity provision. Do you want one? Right? Great question. And I may ask it like, okay, well, what are my options on an indemnity provision? And what are the pros and cons of each? And it will then detail out, like you could do this, or you could do this. And here are the pros and cons of each of those. And that process is really a feedback loop that, if you do that 10 times as a baby lawyer, and 10 times you see, hey, you didn't tell me anything about an indemnity provision. As a baby lawyer, in the 11th one, you're probably going to put in a prompt about a piece of a prompt about an indemnity provision, right? Mm-hmm. You're learning that that's really important. It's funny because I kind of came up with this theory through an experience of my own. Like when I was a kid, I couldn't spell, right? And not because mentally I couldn't figure it out. I just didn't put in the effort. And my mom, when I was a kid, was adamant that she was like, you need to learn how to spell. And being a kid, I actually said to her, I don't need to learn how to spell. Like by the time I get there, somebody will do that for me, which she always thought was ridiculous. And I turned out to be right? It wasn't a somebody, it's a something. But I did learn how to spell. I learned how to spell when I got spell check, because every time I wrote something wrong, it underlined in red and it gave me the proper spelling. And after you see the word iteration in a few iterations, right, you're like, oh, that's how that word gets spelled, and you stop spelling it incorrectly. I think there's an extrapolation of that AI, that repetition, right, that constant surfacing, that's one of the more powerful ways people learn. There are people who can kind of learn, you read something, you write a paper on it, and then you take a test. The test is the diagnostic of did you learn it. Maybe that's a month, right, in a traditional sort of education structure.
Right.
But with AI, you can compress that time period because you get real-time feedback on, you didn't mention this, you didn't include this, you did that incorrectly. And so you get more reps in a tighter space of time, which for most people, I find actually speeds up that learning process. And for lawyers, I think it's going to make better lawyers faster.
Interesting. Let's take the flip side of that then. So you're working with, as you referenced, baby lawyers, the early career professionals, but you serve as a colleague and certainly as an expert in helping other leaders at law firms continue to evolve. We use the phrase, what got you here won't keep you here. So when you're working with those, very experienced lawyers who are kind of like, at best resistant, at worst, just telling you this whole thing's a bunch of BS.
Yeah.
How are you helping them evolve? Because they've been doing something very effectively to get where they are, and it's worked. And now the context in which we're working, the way we're working is shifting. How are you helping bring them along so that they can still capitalize on that strength, that expertise, all that they know, but to your point, leverage the power of these new technology tools to continue to optimize the service that they've been delivering?
Yeah. That old dog's new tricks line is real. But what I find actually is the best way to convert people like that who are kind of in that boat is to show them. So again, I tend to put things in analogies and real world kind of experiences because I think it crystallizes it. I was meeting with a client a couple of months ago in Atlanta, and I was sitting with the leaders, the global leadership team for their legal department, and we were talking about AI, and they kept coming back to I think we talked for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and they kept coming back to, but our data is not in condition. We don't have these exemplars. We don't have, and I kept saying, you don't need them. That's an older technology. That's machine learning. You really don't need that with this. And they kept coming back to the data, right? And they were basically saying, we can't use this. And I finally just stopped in the middle of it. And I said, you know what, let me just show you something. And I plugged my laptop in to the screens that were behind us in the conference room. And I pulled up one of the AI applications that I've helped bring into the firm. And one of the lawyers was like the head of their licensing group, their technology licensing group. And I said, give me the essential pieces of a licensing agreement for you. Mm-hmm. And she said them, she was sitting next to me, and she said them as I typed them into a prompt, right? And I just followed it. It was super simple. And I just banged out exactly what she said with no big iteration, not a lot of detail, whatever, and hit go. And the effect was amazing because they watched in real time while it wrote about a 30 page licensing agreement. If I had done this a couple hundred years ago, they definitely would have burned me at the stake as a witch because they perceived it to be magic. And, they're and then we went through the licensing agreement that it had, and it needed tweaks, but it was 90% of the way there. And the GC said, in a pinch, you could use that out of the bottle, right? But it's really, especially with more established professionals, it's really showing them hey, you can take your expertise and shove it into this thing. And the results you're going to get are, equal to or very close to that thing that you could build on your own in a multiple of hours. Or you could do the heavy lifting with this tool, leveraging your expertise, and move on to the deeper, more valuable parts than just the construction.
Yeah. Very cool. So to pivot a little bit, besides your professional work, you were mentioning that client that you were trying to help them along, leveraging this technology. You spend a lot of time on stage. And so I'm curious from those experiences, your pulse on what people are saying, what are they concerned with, perhaps looking ahead, thinking about where the industry is going, perhaps maybe it is the immediate questions of how can we leverage this value, how can we mitigate the risk, et cetera. But what questions are you hearing most from the legal audiences right now, and what is your honest answer to them?
One of the biggest questions that I hear a lot, and it's kind of why it's a soapbox issue for me, is how do you train people in law school and new lawyers when they have this technology at their fingertips? Do you take it away from them? I adjunct or sit on the AI boards of a handful of law schools. And last summer I helped a law school build an AI-centric curriculum. And it's really interesting because I have heard multiple sort of established faculty members at these schools say things like, we shouldn't allow students to use this, which I find mind-boggling, because if a person comes out of law school and comes to work at my firm, they are expected to use this. It's not like a you can, it's a you will. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is a very interesting conversation that's happening right now. And one of the ways that I respond to that is kind of by surfacing reality, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a person in my family, and she is about to be a senior in college, and she's had amazing grades the entire time she's been in college, and she hasn't written a paper natively since she was a junior in high school, right? She has a very different skill set than a person 10 years ago at her sort of space in life would have. She has a deep understanding of how to leverage these technologies and how to add the human element and how to make it not like something a machine wrote. It's something she's writing with the machine as a tool, right? But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that she decides to go to law school at the end of next year. And let's just say, again, for setting this up, that she goes to whatever the best law school in the country is and ends up the number one person in her class, right? So arguably at that point in time, 4 years from now, she's the most sought after junior associate in the country, just to kind of like put this into context for what we're talking about.
Sure.
At that point, she would have her pick of what law firm she wanted to go work at. And she is not going to go to a law firm who says to her, you can come here and you can practice law basically in the exact same way Abraham Lincoln did, but you'll have email and automated timekeeping, right? That's not going to work because she doesn't have that skill set. She has an entirely different skill set. And so she's going to go work in a place that has the tools that enable her to work in the way that she knows and can be successful. So, like, the idea that you somehow are giving somebody something because you're taking this set of tools away from them and then you're going to give them back to them later has never made a lot of sense to me.
Right.
I was actually having a conversation with my fiance yesterday, and she's a hairstylist, and she was talking about color theory, right? And color theory is something that you spend a lot of time on when you're in like beauty school or whatever, really figuring out. And they teach it a whole bunch of different ways. And one of the things she does with like young stylists is she tells them, like, you really should be leveraging like a ChatGPT or a Claude or something for your color theory, because its understanding of color theory is really deep, and it may tell you to use like she has a project she's working on for somebody today where she's taking their hair from dark to lighter, and like her AI suggested the use of this pigment that she never uses, but explained the rationale behind it and how that would improve her mixture, right? And so she's been doing, like, she's been a high level sought after professional in her space for 2 decades, but she just got a new arrow in her quiver because she had never thought to use this pigment AGI or whatever to get this particular effect. My point in like those 2 stories is this works across the board, right? It's that asking a really good question. Like, I'm trying to do this. Here's how I'm thinking about doing it. Like, how would you make this better? What am I missing? What else could I deploy? What should I be thinking about? That teasing out of information and then using like the expertise you built over time or that you are building, right, in how you deploy that, like, that's the magic. I think when we were talking a couple of days ago, getting ready for this, you know, one of the questions you asked me was like, if it's that easy to build a licensing agreement using AI, like, why would people use lawyers to build licensing agreements, right? And the analogy I bring to that is chess, right? So when AI first came on the scene and Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, people kind of said chess is over, right? Like, AI has this thing. There's no reason for people to play chess anymore. AI will always beat even a grandmaster head to head, right? Just straight up. But a grandmaster armed with AI will always beat AI, which is fascinating. That centaur model, as I like to call it, right? The fusion of like human and horse, or cyborg model, like human and machine. That model beats human operating alone, beats machine operating alone. And in the case of like legal work product, could a person do a credibly good job on their own? Yeah. But a lawyer armed with those same tools, and sometimes like significantly better tools because they've been built and scoped and shaped by data about what an optimal version of that looks like, is absolutely going to run riot on a person who's not a lawyer, who's using the tools to accomplish a similar task. It's going to be better. The subtleties are going to be better. The stuff that like it could go either way is much more likely to go in favor of the lawyer's client than the person. It's just you have a competitive edge, right? It's like a professional athlete playing against an amateur. Same concept. If you give these two groups of people the same tools, the people who really have the deep expertise are just going to use them better.
Yeah. I love that consideration. And I think, sometimes people ask me like, why are you talking so much about AI on this podcast? Well, first off, it's everywhere. It's where we're living and working now. It's the tools that we all can leverage, to your point, regardless of industry, work industry, but also in your personal life. The other piece and the other reason I love learning from people such as yourself with deep dive in this particular industry, leveraging these tools is, my world is all about how can we help individuals and teams optimize and sustain their performance. And the reality is, oftentimes people focus so much on their performance domain. How many reps can you get at serving the tennis ball? How many times can you run this offense? Or how many times can you execute this mission so that everybody knows where they need to be when they need to be there? And then in a particular, private industry space, maybe it's the pitch presentation, or are you running your negotiation and having role plays and running it? That performance domain expertise is critical. What I've always argued is that what else are you needing to be able to show up in that moment that matters, and with the people and tools and knowing how to use them in those moments that matter. So I'm curious, as we wrap up, when we think about how we can sustain that high performance over time with the many tools and people and on our teams, what has helped you evolve through all the changes that you've seen in your career? Are there things that you leverage as a leader that helps you stay grounded and open? I mean, it's certainly curiosity is a big part of what I'm hearing in this conversation as well. But what helps you sustain it? Because in many ways, this is just another tool in everyone's toolbox. And I know there's a lot of fear because of the change and abruptness that some of us feel in it, others may not. But what has helped you sustain it and keep going?
I think curiosity is a big one, right? I think being curious is a superpower in this space. And I think for me, finding low stakes ways of playing with these tools and then pulling the lessons out of that and bringing those forward to consistently okay, it worked here, let's see if it works here. So as an example, I'm my personal fitness is really important to me sustaining my professional performance. When my physical self feels good, my mind is clear, I'm more creative, and I've been training for a very long time. But one of the things that I did really early on in kind of the generative AI journey was I looked at something I was doing every day where I could experiment with can AI help me with that, right? And so I went into it was ChatGPT at the time. I went into my ChatGPT and I prompted it to be basically a fitness coach for me. And I said, you're Peter Athey. I want you to basically initially you have access to all of his writings. So when you're interacting with me, you're operating from Peter Athey's body of work. And I want you to help me. And I gave it a bunch of goals that I wanted to hit. And I worked with my AI to improve how I was how I was taking my fitness journey, right? And then I was well, that worked pretty well. So then I built a personal coach, and then I prompted it and I said, you are Tony Robbins and you have access to the entire body of Tony Robbins' published information. And I use that to think about how if I'm going to have a hard conversation with my fiance, I will sort of practice that conversation and think about ways I could present it and in order to convey information in a way that's not going to create defensiveness, right? It's very important to me that I do this in a way that shows that I love her. And even though this is hard, like, help me get into the right headspace for how I communicate that. And that worked pretty well. As a leader, I built a model that is based on Jack Welch. And, you have the entire body of Jack Welch's published knowledge, like, to use from. So when I'm thinking about how I interact with or motivate a team member, or how I need to talk about, like, the rewards of what we're trying to do. And I did that I still do it, but I did it for about like 6 months consistently every single day, pushing a little deeper every single time. And that daily interaction really helped me to get really good at leveraging them in my professional life, because it's just a different set of questions. It's just a different set of instructions. But by playing with it, literally playing with it in a very low stakes environment, right? You start to understand, like, the kind of the superpower that it can be and the limitations that it has. You start to understand how to tease out, like, is it really right there, by asking really good follow-up questions. And those iterative kind of touches are how I stay really sharp. And it's how I encourage everybody I know to do it. Like, pick something you really like and just start leveraging it and seeing what it does. Like, you like cooking, take a snapshot of the inside of your fridge. Be like, give me 5 recipes that are French that I can make with what I got here, and tell me how to do that. And how should I chop vegetables better? And, like, it's extraordinary when you start to play with it. And I think people struggle or have fear around it because a lot of times they're presented this technology in a pretty high stakes environment, like their job. Mm-hmm. And rather than sort of try and grab a hold of it and wrestle it to the ground in that high stakes environment, pick a super low stakes space and just play with it, because it's a tool, which means it's a toy, right? And I think if people think about it more like that, mm-hmm. they're much more likely to be able to embrace that curiosity piece of it, and it's far less daunting. Right? It's like, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, with the use of any, like, if you're going to execute any new skill, we never learn to throw or hit a fastball in the World Series, right? Like, we learn in the backyard, maybe in T-ball, like maybe in coach pitch. We just learned by playing. And I really like that immediate actionable takeaway that any of our audience can consider is just go play. Like, just go. I love the refrigerator example. Anyone in my family will tell you that, like, dinner planning is not my forte. But yeah, just go play, where, the worst that's going to happen is I'm going to order carry out tonight.
Right. You're going to go, I don't want to make any of those, and I need to go grocery shopping. Right?
They're used to it. It's not a problem. But I appreciate that, rather than having it your first exposure to some type of skill, the use of this technology and tool being in something, a mission set that is very consequential. So go play. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, we learned to ride bikes with parents and then training wheels, right? Nobody jumps on a 2-wheel bike and just takes off.
No, absolutely. Aaron, really appreciate you sharing, not just around the use of AI and how we can leverage this as a tool, but how we can also strengthen our teams and then overall our performance by being open, being curious, and then certainly looking for ways to partner with it as that tool to optimize our performance. So thank you so much. Very much appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much for having me.